All right, we're back with more college football coverage, and in this one, I'll be covering the national championship game to end off the college football season with number 10 Miami of Florida facing off against the number 1 ranked Indiana Hoosier squad. And man, this game went about as I anticipated. But to put things into perspective, this took place in Hard Rock Stadium in Miami Gardens, Florida. And how ironic was that for the situation? You could essentially look at this for the Hurricanes as a bit of a home game. A ton of people popping out in support of Miami there, entering the stadium and watching it live, along with your fair share of Indiana fans as well, being in person to watch things go down. But you would have thought, from the way that it looked in there, pretty much everybody was going to be rocking with the home team from the home state. And it wasn't even just from that standpoint. You had legends of this team there in person. You had the likes of Ray Lewis there. You had Devin Hester there. I believe Andre Johnson was there. Willis McGahee was there. And of course, you can't forget about the coked out Michael Irvin doing his fair share of whatever it is that he does on the sidelines in support of the team. So you already could look at it from that standpoint and kind of have some reservations about this potentially. Nonetheless, the Hurricanes in this situation started off their season there winning against Notre Dame in what would end up being controversial down the line. But now, after making the CFP themselves and having this run of just pure suffocation amongst other top offenses in the CFP to this point, they now looked to take down Indiana for their own shot at the title, to sort of, I guess, confirm their resurgence. Everybody was talking about, the U is back, and they were excited to see it happen. Maybe they were. This was not a run that many people were expecting. But between that defense and what they've been able to do to, no matter how a game looks like on paper, come out with the win damn near every single time, there was a tremendous chance for them to be able to pull it off. But of course, you would be remiss to not have that same mindset for Indiana. Entered this game pretty much dominating anybody who'd stood in their way to this point. And again, while the downside for them coming into this might have been that they'd never been in this position before. At the same time, the way that this iteration of the team has been looking like under Curt Cignetti since he's appeared there, they've been ascending year after year. And it culminated in a point where they remained undefeated before the start of this game. And they would not only look to secure their first ever national championship, but also complete a perfect season. Through it all, despite not having everything line up in their favor, especially when you look at how their team was constructed, and we can get into that later on, man, they had a chance to do something almost unprecedented, quite frankly. And yes, some of it can get overblown with the way that people cover it, but at the same time, I'd much rather have that and give the team their flowers in this situation than just have a season of this kind get completely lost in the trails and lost in the annals of history. So this was a chance to have both coaches as well, especially Cristobal, who's been at this for much longer as a true head coach and has not really gotten to that point of championship success. The only time he even got close before this point was with Oregon, and he promptly got beaten 42-20 in that game against Ohio State in the first CFP national championship. The first iteration of that 4-team playoff, at least. So this is a chance for him to avenge that, and ultimately Curt Cignetti as well on his end to secure a shot in immortality as well by capping off, again, something that we have not really seen before to get straight into the actual game itself, though, it drew out exactly like I thought it would. Two tough defenses and two strong running games would ensure that neither team for a while in this game would truly give much of anything up. As I noted, especially when watching it in post and even tracking it, on Fox Sports, not being able to watch it live, unfortunately, but every single yard in this game was going to be earned, not given. And that tough mentality from both defenses would be on full display early, to be quite honest with you. I think the way in which this was displayed primarily, especially on these first few drives, was how both teams were able to limit the key players in this entire thing. For Miami to look at them first when, addressing their situation, Mark Fletcher Jr., as I also noted, with seeing the way that this game progressed, as I was tracking it, with watching everything in post, and with what he's been able to do over the entire CFP run, he was by far their most important player and their X factor heading into this game. Because even though there were times in previous games where he was being bottled up a little bit, it would take one or two plays from him, completely putting it all on his shoulder and putting the team on his back to lift them over the top and give them the slight edge. With Miami, it's about them playing through their defense and playing through their rushing attack. Now, yes, Malachi Tony is a player who had been pretty damn good over the past couple of games himself, and you had Marion as well, their other wide receiver, make some good plays in the previous game to take them over the top against Ole Miss in that particular matchup. However, Mark Fletcher Jr., when they've needed a reliable guy to lean on, he has been it more often than not throughout this playoff run. And that wasn't going to change in this game. Thing is, Indiana was ready for it with those backers being able to fill up those gaps and keep Miami, even though they were able to get a few first downs. For the most part, they were pushed behind the sticks, kept behind schedule, and forced to punt pretty much within, 3 to 5 plays at this point. It didn't help as well that Indiana's pressure would also begin to get to Carson Beck, with Aiden Fisher being able to log a sack here and ultimately force yet another 3-and-out. They tried to change it up as well, but again, if Mark Fletcher Jr. is being contained and you're trying to go into a completely different direction, it's not that Brown is a bad running back by any means, but that power, that strength from Mark Fletcher Jr. cannot be matched by any other running back on that Hurricanes team. And thus, Kamara, the JMU transfer, one of the many on this Indiana team, would stuff him for a no gain to force another punt at that particular time. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing for Indiana, though. We understood that this Miami defense, in the same way that Indiana was probably going to be one of the toughest matchups defensively they had pretty much all season long, Miami was going to be the same way. And they made sure early and often that Mendoza felt their presence at every turn, although I don't agree with some of the ways that this went down. Because, I don't know, it was like, yeah, you want to let them know that you're there. I do understand that. But at the same time, there was a sequence on one of these early drives for Indiana where you had Thomas, one of their, I think, safeties or D-backs on the Miami side. He just comes up and hits Fernando Mendoza as he hands the ball off. For whatever reason, he just hits him late, and his mouth just gets all bloody from there. Now, in the game, as I was watching it, they show it, they replay it several times, but they never threw a flag for that. And I'm like, that probably warranted one of an unnecessary roughness or a targeting call there. Like, you just can't do that. That's incredibly unnecessary. And it made things just tough for them to deal with. But even at that point, you look at that And you're thinking, oh, okay, that could be trouble. If we have our quarterback getting hit like that within the confines of the game and not having anything happen in terms of any repercussion whatsoever, that could spell trouble. Maybe. However, Indiana, despite that, would be able to steady the course, at least on this drive. It wasn't like Miami was relenting much aside from a broken down play where Omar Cooper Jr. on the first play of this drive was able to break a couple of tackles and get in space for a 25-yard gain down the field. Aside from that, you didn't have too many explosive plays, but they were able to finally, somewhat, take just a smidge of control of the line of scrimmage, get ahead of the sticks, and get themselves in scoring position. Miami, though, with as stout as they have been all season long, they held and were able to force a 34-yard field goal for Radicich to give Indiana the first score of the night. It was like they just had to, again, fight tooth and nail to pick up some of these first downs. It wasn't going to be handed to them on a silver platter. The defense was going to ensure that they felt the pain and that they felt every single thing that came with any potential play on the night. It wasn't going to go unpunished. And likewise for Miami. You got more of the same to start out the second quarter because both defenses at this time would again force 3 and outs on each other, as I had been alluding to beforehand. But Indiana would finally be able to break through on this next drive. And this is where the ball control comes into play. This is where efficiency wins out, even over what Miami has been possessed with for most of the year. Like, the goal is not to be so, I guess, reckless with the ball. It's not to be over the top with their offensive scheme. Indiana wanted to play this as strategic as possible, moving methodically down the field, taking whatever the defense gave them. And, if a shot was on the docket, take it, but be smart in doing so. Ultimately, they did get themselves in a bit of trouble at times, but were bailed out by a couple penalties that you just know as a defense, with you playing them this well to this point, you can't have. I think the real killer for them on this drive, although there was already a DPI that nullified a 3rd and 6 to, switch to an automatic first down, right? This Ruben Bain Jr. defensive offsides penalty, however, on the other hand, on what was a 3rd and 13 at the time, would prove to be brutal. I mean, that's your best guy. And even Ruben Bain Jr. said that this was more than likely going to be his final game in college as he looks to enter the NFL draft. Same thing also for Mesidor, another guy who did have a solid impact across this entire game for this Miami squad. But with all that on the line, a championship a championship at stake, I should say, right? You have to be able to harness some discipline in that situation. And I think Bain Jr. knew that at the time. But again, you put them in the most difficult scenario imaginable, far behind the initial line of scrimmage. And you grant them 5 extra yards to work with. Everything else that happened after this, as far as this drive went, was the absolute worst for Miami. Because, again, you aren't expecting teams to pick up first downs as they run on a 3rd and long situation. But Kaylon Black would get the football in this situation, and he burst right up the middle for a scorching 20-yard gain to get them right near Miami's red zone. And they kept it going. Then they got a situation where Mendoza threw a bit of a dart over to Charlie Becker, who, along with Omar Cooper Jr., as they've said before, those guys have been ascending since the Penn State game and what they were able to do in that comeback win. And I can't lie, it's just crazy to see. Mind you that Becker at this point is a true sophomore, which I did not know beforehand. But some of the plays that he was able to make in this game would prove to be impressive, and we'll get to them in time. As far as this one is concerned, it was a bit of an out route, and he got the leverage he needed to haul in the pass. But hey, he decided, okay, I'm going to, at this point, extend the play a little bit more. He's carrying defenders with him, and all of a sudden, he got himself into the end zone for a touchdown at that point. However, as I watched him post, and as they also reviewed it at this point, they understood that he stepped out of bounds well before he crossed the goal line. So he would be pretty much at the 5. You get yourself goal-to-goal territory, and from there, it would be Riley Nowakowski of every single position player in this game to get Indiana on the board first. I don't think anybody had that on their bingo card. And again, with Nowakowski, it's weird because he is listed as a tight end, but he plays more like a fullback, truly to me. And they had the nerve to call Eli Stowers a top prospect when it came to H-back, fullback types. Nowakowski is exactly that, in every sense of the imagination. But I digress. Miami themselves would have a chance to respond, and they did start to get some timely passes. Now, granted, you're running with a little bit of desperation because you're down 10-0 at this point. You're inching closer and closer to the 2-minute warning. You need to find a way to get on the board here, especially in a game where it's not getting too out of hand. It's not like Indiana is blowing them out of the water, but they have full control of the game right now. And if you could regain any of that, you would do yourself a massive favor. However, with Davis, his CFP performance has been on and off. Of course, we all understand how chaotic that Texas A&M game was for both kickers involved and how windy it was. So maybe there's a little bit of a pass there. But even then, even in these other settings across these games, he hadn't been as automatic as he typically was in the regular season for this team. And it would cost him again here as he literally doinked the kick off the right upright to miss it near the halftime period. And we would go into that point with the score being 10-0 in favor of the Hoosiers at this point. It's insane. It's like Miami, as I noted here, essentially, like they were, with what I saw, they were forcing them to operate behind the sticks. And even when you look at this starting drive of the third quarter, they were able to get all over Mendoza in this situation. Mesidor pummeled him into the ground. Ruben Bain Jr. pummeled him into the ground. And on a different incomplete pass, he had no other choice but to just toss this all the way out of bounds because of the pressure that was coming his way. They were doing exactly what they needed to do in that regard. And offensively, while they might have put together, as I said in that video, their best offensive performance in the CFP to that point against Ole Miss, and it took that to win that game, now you're in a situation where you are containing a red-hot Indiana offense to this point. You yourselves had to come up with a response at some point. And too many missed opportunities early on came back to bite them in the worst possible way. If they had converted on a few more of those chances after those timely stops, who knows how things would have gone. Yet, at this point, they would get the ball back, but they were shut out. However, as has been the case for this entire CFP, all it took was for one play from Mark Fletcher Jr. to be made, and the game would be flipped on its head. Took a stretch play with some great blocking by the tight end, I might add, to space out the extra rusher and give Mark Fletcher Jr. the space he needed to go and try to win this battle at the next level against another one of their backers. Promptly, he got one sharp cut inside and managed to shake him off, stretched it all the way to the outside, the whole rest of the way untouched for a 57-yard touchdown run. Just like that, it was a 10-7 ball game, and Miami gave themselves an instant opportunity to put even more momentum together. The momentum was trending in their direction ever so slightly. They had Indiana right where they wanted them, and it looked for a brief and split second like the offense was starting to crack the code, like they were starting to find a little bit of a rhythm. Could they maintain it? That would remain to be seen. In the meantime, despite Roman Hemby getting a 15-yard run to start out this drive, they would once more force Mendoza under pressure. And again, an offensive line that had typically kept him clean throughout the season was being tested against this strong-ass front seven. Overall, especially with Mesidor and again Bain Jr. holding it down on the edges. It was a struggle for them to constantly win that battle. And when they were losing it, it was tough. They would have to go and punt on this possession. But again, Miami themselves, yet another pair of situations where you are within 3 points. And on back-to-back drives, you essentially go 3 and out. In fact, you have a scenario where you don't even get off your own side of the field in both occasions. They force you deep into your own territory in what was a field position ball game at that point, essentially inside the 15 on both occasions, and you don't even get close to making it out of that specific area of the field. It was the worst possible thing that could happen, especially as you still had their defense, with Mesidor getting another sack on Mendoza, the fifth, I should say, being able to generate stops at this point. Indiana was not blowing them out of the water. They had control of the game for a while, and they had the advantage in the score, but they were still making sure that this was going to be as close as possible. And the opportunities were on the board for them to do something, anything, at this point. The goal for them was simply to keep going. Maybe you find another breakthrough like that Mark Fletcher Jr. touchdown run if you just engage in this and make a simple tweak or two to ultimately overcome that particular game plan. Instead, bedlam, as I noted when watching this punt in real time. Because the second that I saw this and tracked this game, it was fucking crazy in that moment. But you got a true feeling for just how much this particular play changed the game when I watched it live. Because Kamara, again, making yet another play and another impact on this game by getting his hand up and blocking this punt, with it rotating all the way back into the end zone and having Isaiah Jones recover it for a instant punt block touchdown to give Indiana a 17-7 lead at that point. Like, you, again, were finding a little bit of success. And you were generating stops. You had that offense locked up completely. And you have that go down. A special teams blunder in a game that, to that point, had been relatively clean. There hadn't been a turnover at that point. And even this wouldn't necessarily go down as one, per se, but it was a huge shift in momentum. It increased the lead to double digits, and with Miami, again, already being on the fritz at halftime, having to struggle to work their way back into contention for this game in the first place. Now, all of a sudden, you get closer and closer to the final quarter, now trailing by even more points. And you had to maybe double, triple your work just to reach that same level of success as this game would go on. It kept Indiana clean as well. There's no telling what was going to go down on offense. But at the very least, again, the way it was looking for that Miami defense at that time, You kept on giving them fighting chance after fighting chance. And the offense was confident in that if they kept that kind of mentality going, they would be able to break through and ultimately find a way to get a lead on this squad. You don't even give them a chance in that situation to do what they do best. You don't even force Indiana into potentially making a mistake in that scenario by having to go back out on offense and face this absolute, just, I guess, wrecking ball of a defense, one can say. You don't even put them through that struggle because they were able to force it on you first. And that was difficult to take in. You'd have to respond instantly in that situation, or this game could look a completely different way for the Hurricanes. You had no choice. It did help that you get the ball right back in this scenario. But if you didn't do anything worth mentioning, it would be all for naught. Now, even with that being said, they did get themselves going to start out the fourth quarter, at least right at that point. They put together a solid drive, towards the end of the third as they kept on progressing down the field slowly but surely, and they were able to get some explosives. They got C.J. Daniels Jr. open down the field for a 24-yard gain, and they were able to also get Malachi Toney involved in the offensive flow of things as he would break loose for a 22-yard gain as well to put them inside the red zone, where Mark Fletcher Jr. would continue to do nothing but provide that consistent punch from the running back room and get them into the end zone, yet again, with a 3-yard gain to trim this lead down to 3. Again, all CFP long. That man has done nothing but play his ass off for this team, even when the game plan has focused specifically on trying to shut him down. Again, Malachi Toney as well is a point of emphasis for defenses, but again, with the game plan being run specifically through him, he's still finding a way to produce at a high level. It's insane. You have to respect that. And this would be the drive right here that would make people wake up and have to respect what Indiana was doing on their end. Again, yes, they have been a laughingstock program for this much time. But as people had constantly been reiterating, even as I'd said on multiple occasions when talking about games that they've played in, this is not the same Indiana team that we've been accustomed to over the years. This team is dangerous. They are on a mission as well. They're more than determined to, again, bully you with the line of scrimmage, to suffocate you on defense. They've beaten the shit out of teams. But as we mentioned with that Penn State game, even as unexpected as that was, with it being in danger, with me questioning how the hell they were even losing that game in the first place. In one of their weaker efforts, they still pulled it together and got themselves a clutch time win. They got it out of the mud in that game and ground it out for a victory. And you want to talk about clutch plays. It doesn't get any more clutch than some of the sequences on this very drive. For those that still want to question how Indiana got here in the first place. There were a few good times here, as they did have gains of 13 and 18 yards to move the sticks and reset the downs early on in the drive. But as it progressed, Miami was starting to settle in. They were starting to rattle them and make Mendoza as uncomfortable as he could possibly be back there. And they trap him on 4th and 5 as they're progressing in their territory. Mendoza, to that point, had completed just the lone pass earlier on the drive, as I mentioned, to Omar Cooper Jr. for that 18-yard gain in the half. He had been all 4 before then. That is definitely a struggle. And again, shows you that he was not unscathed in this game. They made sure to make things a living nightmare for him out there. However, on 4th and 5, standing in the face of that very same pressure, he threw a dime to try to get something down the field. Now, it looked like an underthrow for a second, but with the way the corner was guarding Charlie Becker on the outside, you kind of had to make that work that way and distract the corner just enough so that Becker could create separation, which is exactly what happened. And his ass, clutch as he's been in a few of these games, especially when you look at that late conversion that he had against Ohio State in the Big Ten Championship, he would harness something like that again and picked up a huge play, adjusting back to the ball as it nearly hit the ground, and he still pulled it up with some of the strongest hands you'll ever see in a particular matchup. He got it done, reeled it in, got the possession that he needed as well by securing his feet, and moved the sticks for a first down. But that wouldn't be the only time that clutch mentality would be harnessed by an Indiana player on this particular drive. And it would come from none other than the Heisman winner himself. Now, the 4th down call in the first place was ballsy. And as I'm tracking it live, I don't have the context of watching the game live at this point and seeing the visual correlation with the play. But I see that, okay, they call a timeout. Maybe you're just going to take your points, right? They've been conservative by nature in these situations. And they decided to, with the game on the line, in a way, go for it on 4th down, and they succeeded. I'm like, that's great. Indiana's up 24-14. That is tremendous for them. But not seeing it in real time and then being able to watch it in post and look at exactly what happened on that particular play put things into even more perspective and will probably be the defining image of this overall run, no matter what happened to Indiana in this game. Because Mendoza steps up on the quarterback draw, essentially, and it was smart. You're not expecting a draw in that situation because they're in an empty formation. You would be looking for a pass somewhere, anywhere. No, you don't get that. You get a straight up run. And as you have defenders converging on him, as he gets a couple yards into it, the man just willed his fucking way into the end zone. Like, it is willpower to the highest level. That defense had been rocking his shit all game long. And he got even more hits absorbed on this play. He had to bounce off of both Bizath, one of the better players on the overall team, with as hard as he can hit, bounced off of that tackle, and also got Thomas back with a little bit of karma in that situation on a dead spin to shake them off at the same time. Stays on his feet, puts one of his free hands down at that point, and just bursts for a few more yards before pulling off a Superman dive into the fucking end zone as his back plate is getting hit. And he scores. If that isn't the best representation of what this Indiana team has been able to do, not just for the program, but you would say for a number of their major sports overall. Like, that just really puts things into perspective. They weren't expected to be here. And even when they got to this point, people left and right counting them out, saying that they could not get it done, shifting all the odds against them, even though they've proven that they can outlast pretty much anybody in the confines of this particular season. And when they were tested when they faced potentially their most adversity in quite some time. They had enough trust in what they were doing as a program. They had enough trust in their system. Cignetti and vice versa had enough trust in their players, and they had enough trust in him to say, you know what, we're going to go for it in this situation. No matter what happens. We're going to put Miami on the absolute defensive here. And we're going to find a way to take even more control of this game late. And that's exactly what they did, with him literally putting it on his shoulders, taking all those damn hits. And I guess people wanted to reframe it, in a crazy way with what he was saying later on as the game would come to a close. But that's exactly what did happen. He took shots from every single direction in this game. And every single time when you think that he's going to be down for the count, when you think the team was going to be potentially at risk of losing this thing, he got right back up. And the team as a whole rallied around that kind of mentality. It's hard not to. And that overall spirit is what was going to carry them to a victory. But by this point, you still had 9 minutes left in the game. There was a lot more time left for Miami to potentially make something happen. And on the ensuing drive, they put together essentially the quickest one they could have asked for. Because in this situation, again, you're in desperation mode. You've been trailing for most of this game, and now you've had to fight this uphill battle for the entire time. That perspective as well on that play is like, damn, we've held them down for as much as we possibly can. And they get that play to convert on our defense, our stealth defense. We have got to find a way, and I mean rather quickly, to redeem ourselves. Because if we let that linger around, we don't have a chance again. So they get a quick score as you would have this go down with Malachi Tony again, just being an absolute freak, lighting it up at 18 years old on the biggest stage in essentially his hometown at that point as well. Just dynamic, so dynamic after the catch. And you'd see that as he would take this play a shorter route, 41 yards down the field, then proceed to work off a screenplay and get a 22-yard touchdown score to trim the lead back down the 3. And at this point, Miami knew that they had more life. There's still a decent amount of time to work with. You have about 6 minutes and some change left, but you needed a stop. And it would be imperative for you to get a quicker one. But ultimately, Indiana, by simply being able to establish ball control more consistently and win the line of scrimmage, they would get closer and closer to sealing the deal here. Again, not with many explosive plays, although it did help that you would have Charlie Becker and Omar Cooper Jr. on different third downs come through again and make clutch catches. Aside from that, though, they kept on reeling time off, getting some solid runs from both Roman Hemby and Kalen Black. And as time was winding down repeatedly, you would ultimately reach the 2-minute warning. They had the ball, and they get a 9-yard run that damn near ended the game right then and right there for Indiana. All you needed was one more yard. You'd been getting more than a yard on most of your carries on the night. Although there were some negative plays forced on Miami's side, which was a positive for them. Until you had their offensive linemen at the worst possible moment, a team that had not really been penalized all that much. I think it was mentioned that they had essentially, to that point, like 11 or so through 3 games at this point, and you get a false start penalty on 2nd and 1 in Miami's red zone with them, you know, in danger of potentially losing this thing. And they had to use their timeout right then and there. So if you pick up the first down, you more than likely in the game here, but it would force Indiana back. They were still able to force Miami to use all 3 of their timeouts, but they would have to settle for a field goal from Radicic to give themselves a 6-point lead and granting Miami at least one more chance. And how fitting is that? With the season on the line on their home turf, they had a chance to start the season off in the same way with potentially ending it on a high note and winning. It was in their cards. It was on their home turf. And they had a chance to get themselves right if they properly engineered a drive to get themselves down the field and keep the ball moving around to get some explosive plays, but not endanger yourselves. Now, this drive to pitch the ending did not start off as well as Miami would have intended. You had back-to-back incomplete passes essentially paired up with a delay of game in that situation. How the hell is that possible in a potential home field advantage situation? That's beyond my understanding. However, that would end up being overturned because Landino, for whatever reason, there was just no reason. You have them backed up on 2nd and 15 with a chance to force 3rd and that long on the play. Yet, for whatever reason, he hit him late. They caught his ass for unnecessary roughness, and they get right back to work from that point. Start to hit a little bit of a hot streak. Now, you're not, again, if you're Indiana in this situation, you're not giving up anything over the top. You'll allow them to get some of these shorter chunk plays going. But they were able to pick up multiple first downs. So, with that, Indiana, I guess, feeling a little bit of pressure, potentially, they decided to waste their last time out with about 51 seconds left to go, as they were in Indiana territory at the 41-yard line. And you'd think that in that situation, they would keep on taking a few chunk plays to, again, strategically, methodically move their way down the field in the same way that they'd intend to, in the same way that Indiana was able to throughout most of this game. Because that would be what it took, in a way, to knock them off in this game. However, maybe seeing that as a terrible way to finish out their season, you had Carson Beck summon that unrelenting voice in his head, and it told him to send that shit deep. And he was promptly picked off on an underthrow by Sharp to effectively end the game. There's a flag on it for unnecessary unsportsmanlike conduct. Fuck that flag at that point. Carson Beck did what he traditionally does. Seriously. It makes no sense. They understood at this point, per what was said on the broadcast, he had 6 turnovers across the 2 losses that Miami had on the season before this point. And we know how one of those games ended with him literally throwing a game-losing interception to end up losing and dropping the match to SMU earlier in the year. And this is kind of the same thing. You're in that territory, you could possibly take a shorter route to work with, and instead you chuck it deep. You don't even get the right timing on the play. You underthrow it with safety help, mind you. In the corner, as he's trailing at this point, understanding that the safety help is there, he recovers and lurks his ass for the interception. The streak was there. I'm not going to lie, it was for a second. Even when you take into account that he had the safety help there. So Carson Beck might have not been completely wrong to throw this ball. But do you know what caliber of quarterback you have to be to make that pass? If you understand that, then you would understand as well that Carson Beck even with him definitely needing to go away after this season, with him using up all his eligibility at this point, in all the time that he's been in college to this point, he's never been that caliber of quarterback. And that's the one thing that Miami could not do in that situation. They, in a similar way as I was talking about with Caleb Williams, it's not like the game was necessarily in the bag per se for them, but there was a different way to go about handling this situation. And you just take that high risk shot down the field, knowing that you are not a quarterback that can make that kind of play happen. And he promptly paid the ultimate price for it. Because from that point on, all Indiana had to do was take one weird-looking knee. They were backed up so completely near their own end zone that they had to find a way to initiate some kind of space there. But ultimately, they closed the game out and they'd seal the damn deal, notching their first ever win in school history when it comes to a title game. 27-21 on this day. For the numbers and then some insight as well, can do that for both teams a little bit. Fernando Mendoza, the fifth, again, not the cleanest game from him. Completed just 59.3% of his passes and had 186 passing yards, while also rushing for -8 yards. He was sacked 3 times for context. But he had that rushing touchdown that, honestly, when you pair that up with the block punt earlier on, just timely play after timely play resulted in them being able to come out on top in this game. And it's not like they ran the ball the best either. They'd want to do it. And in theory, with the way the game was going, you could argue that they did have some success running the ball 44 times. Again, no matter how weak the attack is, because they only ran for 3 yards of carry, technically speaking, but 44 attempts on the ground. And they had 60, well, I guess overall, somewhere around 70 or so plays compared to a much lower amount for Miami. And you take into account the time of possession in this game, they had it for 35 minutes. Just being able to will your way to that regardless of the outcome. It worked to their advantage. Omar Cooper Jr. in this game had 5 receptions for 71 yards, and Charlie Becker had 4 receptions for 65 yards. They didn't even need much from Elijah Surratt, who was held to just 3 receptions for 28 yards, and they still won this game. So, no longer could we sit here and say that Indiana couldn't get it done, because they just went out and just put together a season for truly the ages. Now, I don't have a subscription to The Athletic. I can afford one. But I do get email newsletters from the New York Times overall, and some of that includes material from The Athletic. And in that, they mention how, we could start having a number of different conversations about this Indiana team. With, their turnaround in recent years being comparable to some of the other great turnarounds in college football history. They mention early Miami in 1970s era college football under Howard Schnellenberger. They mention Bill Snyder in Kansas State in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And they threw a whole lot of other names out there as well. They compared it to, potentially say that this could be one of the greatest sports teams, sports stories across any sport ever. And again, whether or not people will say that outside of Indiana, outside of that university, the fact that we are even having that conversation right now, as this writer mentioned, is truly something to marvel at. You have got to respect that. And I'm sure that everybody in Bloomington is having themselves a hell of a time right now. You know, they were interviewing, I think, the president of the university on the Pat McAfee show and things like that, and I'm sure there are more appearances there. There was an interview that I didn't fully watch, but it was mentioned that they had a student, I believe, a writer for their school newsletter, appear on the Paul Feinbaum show for a little bit to have a chat. Like, they are more than inclined to celebrate this moment. Because throughout the entire season, they earned that shit. Truly. Just put a couple of things into perspective. And what stands out the most to me is that, you know, even without watching it in post, as I caught a glimpse of one particular stat line, this just puts it all into perspective and just shows you a lot about sports in general and about college football. Because earlier, you know, to cap off the regular season recaps for the year, I leaned in to Rich Rodriguez for forcing West Virginia into a situation where they lost a home game in potentially the worst margin of victory since 1893. And again, I was like saying all that stuff, just tripping on how historically bad that was. But now we flip it to what Indiana was able to do. Not only were they able to beat every single opponent they faced off against this season, in varying difficulty, but by tallying up those wins in this fashion, they became just the second team in college football history to accrue a 16-0 season. The only other team to have ever done so before this point of time was 1894 Yale with their Bulldogs football team. 1894 Yale was the last instance we have ever seen a team win that many games in a season without dropping a single game. Do you understand how crazy that is? We say all the time that on any given day, any given team can be beaten. And with talent just oozing out of some of these other teams, that they were able to beat this season. Despite all of that, they found a way to remain unbeaten and do something that essentially no other team in nearly 2 whole centuries has done. It's crazy, man. As I said, when I made that video talking about all the stuff that happened in the NBA season, when I ended off the recaps for the overall season in 24-25 at that particular point of time, when I talked about how cinematic it was to see the World Series and the MLB season overall come to a close in the fashion that it did. And now we are at yet another one of those situations with Indiana, 715 losses, I should say. It's still the second most ever in college football history, behind only Northwestern, who just recently passed them. And Indiana will still be, at this point in 2022, they were at that time the first college football team to reach 700 losses. This program has been through essentially football hell. They have been the bottom feeders of the NCAA when it comes to FBS D1 football for the longest period of time. And they have been a program that has been around for 138 years to this point. 136 of them, they weren't even thought of in the same stratosphere as some of these other teams. And now, in just a matter of a couple of years, with Signetti having a tenure, a 2-year span, with a new program comparable to that of Urban Meyer, better even. His 27-2 mark as a coach with this Indiana squad outdoes what Urban Meyer did at 24-2 to start out his tenure at Ohio State in his 2-season span with his first couple of years there. You take all that into account, and in that span, they're undisputed, undefeated champions that could potentially be seen as unheralded, as potential flukes. Is this really something that happened, or is this something that we're dreaming about? Some people may say. And unheralded, you may ask? They mentioned a graphic with something that I was watching, and I mean, they've been alluding to this for a while. But to accomplish this, again, in a day and age where there is an influx in potential overflow of talent at times to where you have all these people entering the transfer portal in the first place. You have all that going down. And Indiana was able to accomplish this. Indiana, of all schools, while never doing so before, accomplished the job without having a single 5-star recruit on their team. And just 8 4-star recruits. And that really puts things into an entirely different perspective. Pretty much every other team that they have to deal with in the CFP had at least 50 or more 4 or 5-star guys on average per the graphic. And it just sends an even crazier message. You know, the status quo is that, hey, you have to constantly dip into the transfer portal and get the best possible asset for your team at the right time and be first to do so while pouring in the most money imaginable to make it happen and outbid other teams, you know, in certain ways to acquire that talent. Or you're going to lose your stronghold on a potential conference or in a potential setting within the program even, you know, if you're unwilling to conform to that specific standard. Hold on. Because Signetti, with him accomplishing this now, has provided you with proof that a system predicated on truly developing talent for the long run, on maximizing on the potential of any asset that may come through a program, can win you a championship. Relative to having to acquire the biggest names on repeat while having a massive amount of money to work with to continue pumping funds over to these different players and things like that to bring them into your program. It can be done without having to be as money hungry as possible. It can be done without having to be so reliant on top-end talent. And not just any top-end talent. Premier top-end talent. Like, talking about rankings and stuff, we're talking about top 5 overall talent positions across the board for some of these teams. And still, a team made up primarily of 3-star or lower ranked athletes can get it done. And as I said when I mentioned that Josh Hoover was coming over here in the first place, through the transfer portal, he is a 4-star guy. And it, again, creates more craziness for them to where, again, they can maintain this potentially. Because as long as the system is there, forget the money, forget the names of the players coming through your program for a second. Signetti is a damn good coach, and that has been proven. The organization, compared to what they had been doing for 136 years prior, is well run and in genuine order. And when you have that, when you can build that from the ground up, compared to having everything be top down and just inserting all of your time and energy into getting, again, top end talent without developing anyone truly and just trying to coast along. The former is always going to outlast the latter. Talent can win out at times, but Indiana again shows that they have a shot to change a lot about what we know when it comes to college football. And maybe college sports in general, even. That's why it's great. You have got to love sports. Being a microcosm of life in a time where there's so much other chaos going on, pretty much everywhere at this point of time. But we can always, even in moments like this, be able to see a wide variety of different experiences that captivate us. Your blue bloods, especially when it comes to football and basketball in college, we see how the hell Duke, for example, in college basketball, you see how much they consistently get the top end recruits. And they're still damn good. Like, it's like a farm system there. They just constantly rank near the top in terms of recruitment. And a lot of their players, at the same time, they're great, but they're one and done. You don't always have them stay for the long haul. And some do. So it was interesting to, have Zion James, for example. He was a senior with that program. And he did get drafted, along with Neupel, to the Hornets, for reference. That's one example. But with Indiana, you're getting a ton of different players who, again, out of high school, aren't really ranked all that high. On 247 Sports, especially in my first video, I was mentioning how you had a number of different players have their star rating increase since high school as the specific legend marked for a few players at a time. And I think that is a testament to any program who can bring in a player who, again, may not be viewed as all that much coming into it. But working on the right things, having a good system to lean on, and having a coach that you trust in. All three of those things combined, and the stock of a player can rise up just like that, authentically, without having to buy anything like that to accomplish it. It's natural. And it is truly sustainable. So again, like I said now, this Indiana team could potentially be here to last. This is not a one-off situation for them. They seemingly are just getting started here. And it poses a whole dynamic, a whole new one to explore in the realm of college football. Truly does. Nothing but respect to them. And hey, keep it in the Big Ten after all, as they have won the last three, I should say, national championship games in a row. There we go. But to Miami's side, with all of that being said, as historically great as that was for them to pull off, there's also some historical significance for Miami's involvement as well. And, of course, they put together a decent game. They did. When you look at Carson Beck in this one, 232 yards and a touchdown ain't bad. You'd probably want him to hike up that 59.4% completion percentage, and you could do without that game-sealing interception. You truly could. But it was a fine performance overall. As I said, the defense was unrelenting. But when you needed your offense to give you more of a punch, Indiana was just stout on their end. It was almost like a stalemate. They truly could not take any of those plays and find a true impact early on. They were able to, turn that up a notch down the stretch, but by that point, they'd already been outpaced. They'd already lost the battle of ball control. And by that point, it was too late. Mark Fletcher Jr. in this game had 17 rushes for another 112 yards across a CFP run that was great for him individually, and 2 touchdown runs on 6.6 yards per carry. And Malachi Tony in this game also had 10 receptions for 122 yards and a touchdown. CJ Daniels Jr. also had 4 receptions for 62 yards in this game. But to put things into perspective for Miami, as I prefaced, you're at home. It felt in a way as though you had a lot, and I mean a lot, of fans there supporting you specifically. You're home. You have nothing to lose in this scenario. Like, the ball was in your hands. And to go out in such a way put forth a damning trend for them, as they would become the 5th team since 1998 to lose the national title game in their home state. It's not a part of history, or that's not the side of history you want to be on the part of, rather, I should say. They played their hearts out. They did. Again, they got manhandled in a way. And when you are down for that much time, it's really hard to pick yourself back up from that point. Miami should very well be proud of what they were able to accomplish this season. Again, they, like Indiana in a way, in the confines of this season, were not expected to even get remotely close to reaching this point. And yet, they still pulled it off, despite Cristobal's reputation of falling off when it comes to the months of November and December as a coach. He weathered the storm, he got this team prepped to go in the postseason, and he got within a single drive of giving Miami their first national title since, I believe, the early 2000s. The U, in a way, could be back for them still. There's a way. As I'd mentioned, they're actively retooling this roster in the transfer portal. So it's not like they are just, unless they manage it in such a bad way, it's not like they're going to completely fall off the face of the earth next season. No, they're trying to be a consistent threat as well. Maybe not to the same extent. But with the way that the ACC was underrepresented, you could argue, and granted that was on their own volition because of the quality of some of the other teams in the conference. And with the way the Clemson have been tailing off themselves, Miami has got a chance now, a window to emerge as the rightful suitor to lead the ACC, if that makes sense. And when Miami was at the top of their game at that point of time in the early 2000s, looking at their football team, I don't believe that they were in the ACC at the time. So I can check that right now to confirm that. I do not believe that. Let me see. They have anything like that? Let me check real quick. Okay. Yeah. They were in the Big East Conference at that point, and then moved to the ACC in 2004. Right. Now again, even in those early years, they were still regarded as an elite program, but again, they did not have the same success. Like, you're telling me, man, ever since they've been in the ACC, as I'm seeing right here, again, Wikipedia is not always the way to go, but I was just trying to get a look and see exactly what the breakdown was here. And essentially, they hadn't logged many 10-win seasons since that early 2000s era. This 13-3 year, even if they're going to, be viewed as the losers in this situation, and promptly so, this is their third overall 10-plus win season in at least the last 22 years, going on 23, following that 2003 year, where they finished 11-2 and won the Orange Bowl. It's just like, man, that is a tough fall from grace for the overall program. But Cristobal, in these last 2 years, again, with him going a combined 23-6, there is a chance that he's starting to figure it out just a little bit. And a championship for him would have meant a lot, I would think. Because again, he led a solid Oregon team for so many years and was never able to get over the hump there. So, an opportunity to come out on top here, get himself a championship after being a Saban disciple himself for all that time, would have been great. But again, there can only be one winner at the end of the day. Man. So that's unfortunate from that perspective. You'd also have a brief little controversy brewing, as there would be a scenario that I did end up seeing after the game, where you had separate clips of Mark Fletcher Jr. punching Tyreek Tucker, and then afterwards, I guess with him cooling down and everything after that, he shook hands with Fernando Mendoza the fifth. And I'm like, in the moment, I'm like, okay, what exactly happened here? There is quite a lot within that, and it does look incredibly bad, all things considered. The negative PR came his way instantly. And, even as I was trying to look for other details on this, some of the headlines were just, saying some of the craziest things. They called it a disgusting punch. They called it a dirty sequence. Everything under the sun. But with some of the details that would be, conveyed about this particular situation, there could potentially be some different avenues to go into it. Just to come right out and say it, as this particular quote says, and this is via Mike Rumpf, recruiting director for Miami himself, quote, "Dude was talking about Mark's dad who passed away last year." Rumpf commented on a video of the altercation posted by CBS Sports. "Mark is and always will be one of the most classy people you will meet. R.I.P. Mr. Fletcher." And to add even more context to it, as this quote states from Sports Illustrated, Fletcher's father very clearly was a big part of the Miami running back's life, as it was revealed during the game that he kept his late father's phone so he could still text him before every game. The younger Fletcher also wore LLBM on his eye black in order to honor his father. End quote. And for reference there, again, while I didn't see this, because again, I wasn't watching the game live at the time, they also mentioned that there was like a segment run about that specifically throughout the course of the game to add context. And he also texted, again, promptly with that information about him keeping that phone. He texted him again and, asked that his late father be with him in spirit as he was playing at that particular point of time. Even Holly Rowe, as I also read in this article from USA Today Sports, had to come to his defense, as it was also revealed at the time that Mark Fletcher Jr. was going to return for the next college football season, which makes sense. He's definitely a solid prospect, and, if there's any opportunity for him to increase that stock, he's well inclined to go for it. But as far as this incident itself, again, no matter how you slice it, that's just like, ugh. That gets pretty ugly very fast. Now, I'm not saying that you should be in a situation where you have to throw hands with anybody. I can't sit here and say that. I can't sit here and act like I promote that kind of thing. But what I will say if that is proven to be true, if Tucker did actually say that to Mark Fletcher Jr., well, he wouldn't be in the wrong in that scenario to pull it off, and Tucker would be, and probably should be, if that is true, ridiculed for that kind of comment. Because understanding that this, again, Mark Fletcher Sr., for context, as these articles are saying, passed away late in 2024. So this is still a relatively fresh thing on Fletcher Jr.'s mind at this point of time. And to have something be said about something and someone that close to him, again, not even being there to defend themselves at all, what could you have possibly been alluding to in that situation with bringing him up to Fletcher Jr.? And how, in that situation, would he not be inclined to take that as potential disrespect? Also, with some of these headlines, again, there's no way that we can know what either of them said in that situation. And you even had Tucker himself come out and say to find his view on things. You just make sure that I have it. As he said, quote, "I was just trying to congratulate him on the game. He tried to sneak me. Everybody kind of held me back. That was a cheap punch. Luckily, we got the win. I'm not really too worried about it. He's salty. He going home with the L." End quote. That's what he said. We, again, have no proof of what was specifically said in that moment. And neither side has come out and said as much. Matter of fact, Fletcher Jr. hasn't even commented on the situation himself. So until we hear a number of different things, and even then, we don't have the full context. Only those two in this moment of time can understand what was truly said in that situation. But if that is proven to be true, if Tyreek Tucker did actually say something along those lines, then those headlines would have to change completely. Disgusting hit. Mark Fletcher Jr. should be penalized for what he did to Tyreek Tucker. Well, if you have comments being made about a deceased loved one in that situation, and one that he had a close connection to, by all accounts, could you really blame him? I don't think so. So again, only in time would we really be able, and there's only a slim chance of that, to figure out exactly what happened here. But as far as we know now, that is the case. And again, you have the punch going viral without people having the proper context potentially on the situation. But people don't want to, have the same energy for him going out minutes later and embracing Fernando Mendoza V, showing a ton of respect to him. Like, it's interesting. Again, context matters. Context fucking matters. All these knee-jerk reactions, in some cases, may be a little warranted. But again, when you just don't have anything surrounding the matter whatsoever, and you're just not informed about it, it just makes for a situation that, again, completely tears Mark Fletcher Jr. down in a moment where that is far from his intent whatsoever. And that just might not have been, in that situation, the attention he's trying to draw to himself. Can't vilify the man for that, especially if that is the truth. Because you talking shit about his decision making in this situation behind a screen would probably do the same thing in the same scenario, or attempt to do the same thing in the same scenario if that was you. Aside from that, though, generally it's going to be tough for Miami to stomach that. You have both teams seeing a ton of different players move on to either enter the draft, or a ton of players enter the transfer portal as well. And, from that standpoint, I can essentially end it off here with making another note about another Mendoza. Because smartly, Alberto Mendoza in this situation, his brother, has now transferred to Georgia Tech per 247 Sports. And with the now Haynes King, list squad trying to find a new path forward, they enlist him as a transfer to potentially get them on the right path. Now, the thing with him is that people are not sure of whether or not he's ready to be a starting caliber quarterback for a program just yet. And you know what? I guess that's something that we'll learn about. The thing is, Georgia Tech is perfect. You move on from an established veteran in Haynes King for all that damn time. And you are now taking a chance on a guy who's a lot younger. You have ample time now with that reset to work this out. See what you have in Mendoza, and then move forward from there. And Alberto Mendoza as well, with the way that they've been getting things done in terms of overall recruiting, in terms of the transfer portal, he's getting some weapons around him. So that could be another interesting caveat to this from that perspective. But that'll do it for this one. What a tremendous college football season this was. Even if some might not say that it's the best of all time, it was definitely a good one to watch unfold. And the end result, truly something unlike anything we've ever seen before. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.